The first tremor came without warning. Dr. Lena Arden had been calibrating the quantum array when the sensors on station Helios flickered violently. At first, it looked like a simple spike, solar wind interference, but the anomaly grew, stretching through every diagnostic line like a ripple through steel. "It's not natural," she said, her voice clipped over the station comms. She knew the rules. Report, but don't speculate. Yet instinct screamed at her. The readings weren't just anomalous. They were recursive, folding in on themselves like the waves of some impossible tide. Commander Elias Thorne stood behind her, hands clasped behind his back, face lit by the cold blue glow of the screens. His eyes, sharp and unyielding from 20 years in forward command, flicked between sensor feeds, telemetry, and the live orbit cams. "Define recursive," he said, his tone the mix of curiosity and authority that kept the engineers from panicking. Lena's fingers danced over the interface, isolating a section of the data. "These particles," she began, hesitation in her voice. "They're behaving as if the past and future are overlapping. They're responding to events that haven't happened yet, and to actions that are already concluded." Thorne's jaw tightened. "So time?" "Not exactly. It's more like—" Lena stopped. Words failed. The anomaly defied even the most advanced theoretical models. It's folding in on itself. Every input triggers an echo from the future, and the echo modifies the present. The room went silent. Even the hum of the station's artificial gravity felt too loud. Thorne didn't flinch. "What does that mean for the station?" "Structural stress is minimal for now, but the quantum arrays are unstable. If it escalates," Lena let her hand trail over the readouts. The pattern on the display was a lattice of impossible symmetry, like some cruel joke by the universe. "We could lose the station, or worse." Across the comm link, Lieutenant Merrick Voss, the station's tactical officer, interjected. "We've got unidentified contacts. Sensors are reading multiple simultaneous trajectories around Helios. They don't match any fleet signature we know. Could be drones, could be probes, could be—" His voice cut out as the display flared red. Something was moving too fast and too unpredictably for conventional sensors. Thorne strode to the observation deck, peering through the reinforced viewport at the black beyond. There, in the inky void, shapes rippled as if reality itself were warping. Small clusters shimmered and blinked in and out of existence, leaving afterimages that persisted longer than physics allowed. "Merrick," Thorne barked, "status on weapons and shields?" "Shields at 35% efficiency. Energy grid is unstable. We're seeing feedback loops in the reactor core when I try to ramp power. Weapons are offline until we stabilize the flux." "Then we stabilize the flux," Thorne said. He turned to Lena. "Your arrays? They're the source of the feedback," she admitted. "If I shut them down, we lose the only chance to study this. But if I don't, the station could fragment from internal distortions." Thorne weighed the options. There was no perfect choice. Every course promised danger. Every hesitation amplified it. "We're not abandoning Helios," he said. His voice carried over the room, iron-willed. "We adapt. Now." Merrick activated the station's automated drones. They surged out, small and nimble, designed for repair and scouting, but Thorne had them reconfigured for tactical disruption. The drones flickered in the folds of time, appearing and disappearing at offsets that made them nearly untouchable. The unidentified objects reacted, forming patterns, then splitting like quantum amoebae avoiding containment. Lena watched, fascinated despite the danger. The anomaly was responding to their every maneuver, but in ways they hadn't predicted. A sharp alarm cut through the tension. Hull integrity sensor screamed. A panel on the port side was distorting, its edges shimmering and bending, as though space itself was curling inward. Voss shouted into the comm. "Hull breach. Secondary seal failing." Thorne didn't hesitate. He grabbed a tactical tablet and activated the station's emergency field generators. A lattice of force enveloped the damaged sector, a shimmering cage designed to compensate for spatial instabilities. It held for now. Lena keyed in a command to stabilize the quantum array further, but each adjustment caused another ripple, shifting the anomaly's response. In a mess of lights and sirens, Dr. Ardent noticed a pattern. Small, almost imperceptible, but there. The anomaly didn't simply react, it mirrored. Every time they corrected one flux spike, a complementary spike occurred elsewhere. It was as if the anomaly were self-correcting, anticipating their moves. "They're predicting us," she said aloud, eyes wide. Thorn leaned over her shoulder, absorbing the data. "Then we change the game," he muttered. "We fight without pattern. Improvisation. Randomization. Give them nothing to mirror." For the next hour, the station became a crucible of ingenuity. Drones darted erratically, shields pulsed in staggered sequences, reactor cores were throttled and rerouted, creating unpredictable energy signatures. Every crew member was a node in a living, adaptive network of survival. And yet, with every small victory, the anomaly grew, learning, folding, adapting. Then came a first casualty. One of the larger supply drones, repurposed as a defensive sentry, vanished into a ripple of distorted space, leaving behind a faint echo of its last telemetry broadcast. Merrick muttered a curse, his face pale. That's impossible. There's nothing in the physics that... Lena's mouth was dry. "I'm telling you, this isn't physics. Not as we know it. This is a paradox in motion." Thorn didn't flinch, though the weight of command pressed down on him like gravity. "Then we treat it like one," he said. "Contain, adapt, survive. Nothing else matters." Hours blurred. The anomaly's shapes grew bolder, sometimes aligning in configurations that suggested intelligence, or a natural order they could not perceive. The station's hull groaned under invisible stresses, floors and bulkheads bending subtly, enough to make the crew's stomachs lurch. Yet through the chaos, Lena caught glimpses of possibility. Weak points where the folds thinned, regions where intervention could stabilize the pattern long enough to study it. It was in that fragile clarity that Thorn made his first real tactical decision. "We launched the probe swarm," he ordered. "Small, fast, unpredictable. Hit the anomaly at multiple points simultaneously, measure response, and pull back. No heroics. Data first. Survival second." The launch was chaotic. Drones flickered between existence and non-existence, sometimes vanishing for seconds only to reappear miles away. Lena's hands flew over the control panel, tracking, logging, compensating. Voss coordinated with Thorn, relaying status updates in clipped bursts, each message a lifeline in the unrelenting storm. And then it happened. One of the drones, on a random trajectory, collided with the anomaly's fold. Instead of destroying it, the anomaly recoiled in a way they hadn't predicted. A section of a distortion folded inward on itself, forming a mirrored pocket, a small, stable reflection of the impossible wave. Lena's heart raced. "It's a pattern. We can manipulate it." Thorn's eyes gleamed, the first real hope since the tremor began. "Then we exploit it," he said, voice low, precise. "We force the fold to close on itself. If we can control the reflection, we can predict the unpredictable. And if we can predict it," he didn't finish the thought, but the room knew the implication. Control meant survival. As the first calculations were transmitted, the station shuddered violently. Bulkheads flexed and groaned. Air alarms screamed. The lights dimmed and flickered. The anomaly had responded. It was aware. It was learning faster than they could iterate. Lena whispered, almost to herself, "It knows we're trying to outsmart it." Then the feed went dark. Every sensor, every readout, every drone telemetry collapsed into static. The station's systems hiccuped, restarted, and came back half-blind. Thorn gritted his teeth. "Status," he barked. "Multiple hull stresses," Voss reported. "Shields down to 12%. Drones, 50% lost. Quantum array unstable. We might be trapped in a loop, sir." Thorn's eyes swept the observation deck, staring at the impossible ripples of reality outside. The station hung in the void like a single leaf in a storm of broken time. Lena's voice trembled, barely audible over the alarms. "If the fold closes on itself, if the paradox completes." Thorn's jaw set. Then we make sure we're ready for whatever comes out of the other side. And in the deep, silent reaches of space, the anomaly pulsed, folding in, waiting, learning, and watching the fragile station cling to its last thread of control. The moment the anomaly's pulse receded, Helios shuddered again, as if space itself exhaled in relief, and then recoiled in anger. Thorn moved through the corridors like a man possessed, every step measured, every command precise. Systems were fragile. Hull panels still shimmered from invisible stress lines. The station groaned with the memory of near collapse. "We regroup," he ordered. "Diagnostics on every deck. No exceptions. Voss, prep the secondary drone swarms and make them unpredictable." Voss's jaw was tight, fingers flying across the interface as he reprogrammed the drones. "Unpredictable," he muttered. "That's a literal nightmare with these AI cores. They're trained to optimize, to learn patterns. If I scramble them too much, they'll self-destruct. Better 1,000 dead drones and 1,000 dead crew," Thorn snapped. Lena Arden stood over the quantum array, her hair loose, damp with sweat. The anomaly isn't static. Every small victory is feeding it data. If we keep reacting conventionally, we'll only accelerate it. I can't force it into stability unless we innovate, unless we weaponize the paradox itself. Thorn raised an eyebrow. "Weaponize?" She swallowed, trying to steady her voice. "We use its own folds against it. Force a reflection, a feedback loop that contains its movement temporarily. If we can hold it, we can map the fold, predict the next behavior, maybe even control it for short bursts." He nodded, absorbing the risk. "Then we try." They worked in tense rhythm, Lena feeding simulations to the command grid while Merrick oversaw drone trajectories, and Thorn coordinated station power to avoid overloading the reactors. Every adjustment sent tremors through the station, metal creaking as if in protest. Time itself seemed thicker here, slower, heavier. By mid-cycle, a breakthrough emerged. A mirrored pocket within the anomaly's fold responded to controlled energy pulses from the quantum array. It held briefly, but predictably. Lena's eyes lit with excitement. "We can do this." It's stabilizing long enough to measure precise vectors. But small victories came at high cost. One of the largest corridor conduits fractured, sending a scalding wave of air across Deck 12. Merrick threw himself against the emergency seal. His forearms burned through the containment gloves. Blood and grit streaked the metal as the seal hissed closed. He cursed, the first of many casualties, and Thorn's heart sank as he watched Merrick grimace through the pain. "You'll survive. Get patched and back to work," he said, though every word carried the weight of knowing some losses could not be undone. Political pressure began to intrude. Communications from the Outer Command faction arrived, terse and impatient. They demanded results, progress, evidence, yet the anomaly defied conventional proof. Thorn argued with them over comm relays. "You're asking us to treat a paradox as a routine hazard," he said. "We're not proving theory, we're surviving it. Every delay, every political interference risks annihilation." The reply was sterile. "Do what you must, Commander. But do not fail. The repercussions will be assessed." The station seemed to hum an answer, like a beast aware of scrutiny. Lena swiveled toward the viewport, eyes narrowing. The anomaly had shifted. Entire folds seemed to coalesce into a lattice of brighter, more aggressive pulses. Each pulse appeared to reach not just spatially but temporally, tugging at moments that had not yet occurred. It was learning. It was aware. Thorn gathered his core team in the operations hub. "We launch a coordinated sweep tomorrow," he said. "Drones in multiple vectors, shield pulsation staggered, energy spikes randomized. We force it into a containment loop long enough to gather intel on the fold structure. Success is survival. Failure," he didn't finish. The word hung in the air, unspoken but understood. Lena spoke next, voice tight. "We'll need a secondary stabilization protocol. I can modulate the quantum array to create multiple micro-reflections, but the energy draw will stress the reactors to 70% of maximum. That's risky." Thorn's gaze didn't waver. "Do it." We can't afford predictable patterns. Merrick, coordinate defensive drones for potential breach points. Every deck, every hatch, every reactor conduit covered. And if any crew member is caught outside containment zones, he paused, letting the weight of responsibility sink. Then we learn from it. Adapt. They spent hours preparing. Marek's drones flew irregular loops, mimicking random motion, while Lena adjusted the array to pulse at stochastic intervals, testing every conceivable combination. The anomaly responded as expected, then exceeded expectation. A sudden flare rippled through Helios sensors, bending corridors, echoing sounds of the crew's movements milliseconds before they occurred. Lena's stomach dropped. "It's predicting our improvisation," she whispered. Thorn gritted his teeth. "Then we escalate." At the first sign of the anomaly's mirror effect stabilizing, Merrick deployed a team to check critical conduits. They moved through shifting corridors, where walls flexed and floors bent subtly. Every step a careful calculation of weight distribution. Even the simplest passage was a potential trap. One misstep could collapse a corridor section or warp them into a fold, vanishing for minutes or longer. Casualties mounted. One engineer, caught mid-step as the anomaly warped a hallway, suffered a broken leg and temporary temporal disorientation, a sensation of moving out of sync with reality. Voss coordinated an emergency extraction, manipulating local magnetic fields to stabilize the section long enough for rescue. Lena monitored the quantum array, every pulse synchronized with their movements, praying the anomaly didn't react in unpredictable ways. As the sweep began, the anomaly flared violently, waves folding in on themselves in rapid succession. Lena's system identified microreflection zones, pockets where they could contain the fold long enough to map its structure. Thorn's tactical plan kicked in. Drones entered each zone, broadcasting real-time telemetry back to the mainframe, creating a three-dimensional temporal map of the anomaly's lattice. It worked temporarily, but just as quickly, the anomaly adapted. One drone, nearing the edge of a fold, blinked out of existence. Telemetry data scrambled into unreadable bursts. Lena cursed, recalculating on the fly, feeding the array adjustments to compensate for the missing node. It's anticipating even these precautions," she muttered, horror edging her tone. Thorn's hand rested on the console. "Then we go faster. Break patterns before it can form one. We don't wait for intelligence. We force action. Adaptive strikes." The station became a maelstrom of energy, soundless yet deafening. Drones darting in erratic arcs, shield fields pulsing in staggered sequences, hull stress relays screaming. Every system reached critical load. Merrick coordinated extraction teams, sometimes pulling them back from the edge of vanishing corridors, while Lena manipulated the array like a concert pianist under fire. Each pulse risked destabilizing reactors. Each movement risked spatial collapse. By the end of the operational window, they had succeeded. Partial containment, enough to map 30% of the anomaly's folds. Enough to predict immediate behavior. But the cost was brutal. Nearly half of the drone network lost, reactor cores overstrained, multiple hull panels compromised, and crew fatigue beyond endurance. One team member was missing, presumed displaced into a fold. Reality swallowing them briefly, leaving only a faint echo of presence. Thorn surveyed the hub, his face a mask of exhaustion and determination. "We've learned something," he said. "We've gained leverage. That's all that matters. We adapt again tomorrow, and the next day, until we find a way to survive." Lena's fingers hovered over the quantum array, the screens reflecting her pale, determined face. "Tomorrow," she said, voice firm despite exhaustion, "we push further. But if we push too far..." Thorn didn't answer. He didn't need to. The station hung in orbit like a fragile shard, caught between comprehension and annihilation. The anomaly pulsed outside, relentless, ever learning, folding time in on itself, waiting, watching. And Helios' crew had no choice but to match its pace, one desperate innovation at a time. As the lights flickered from the next minor flux spike, Thorn muttered under his breath, "We survive, or we die." Nothing else exists in that moment. And for the first time, they realized survival wasn't just tactical, it was moral, mental, and temporal, a crucible they might not endure without fracturing. The station braced for another surge, knowing that the anomaly would test them again before sunrise, and that every decision, every improvisation, carried consequences they could only begin to imagine. The anomaly pulsed with increasing intensity, its lattice of folds now spanning distances that had been unimaginable just days before. Helios' orbit trembled under the strain of near-constant micro-adjustments, the station's hull flexing in silent protest. Thorne had called an emergency council with Lena, Merrick, and the diplomat analyst, Dr. Cale Riven, who had arrived from the Outer Command to observe the temporal phenomenon and its potential strategic implications. They were running out of conventional options, and Thorne's mind churned over the limited tactical playbook they still had. "The folds are expanding," Lena said, pointing at the three-dimensional projection hovering over the command table. "Partial containment is barely holding. Every attempt at stabilizing one fold creates pressure in another region. It's a dynamic system, adaptive, reactive, intelligent. We've mapped only 40%, and the missing sections, they're unpredictable." Cale Riven leaned over the display, hands clasped. "Unpredictable, yes, but not random. There's an underlying pattern. If you look at the energy flux and the microreflections, certain sequences repeat in a statistically significant way. It's not intuition, it's probabilities." Mark's voice was low, cautious. "Probabilities we can't act on in time. One wrong move, and we lose more drones, more hull integrity, maybe personnel." He avoided Thorne's gaze, the memory of the last team member lost still fresh. Thorne studied the projection, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Then we create chaos they can't predict. Small strikes in multiple vectors, interference in the reflection nodes, and targeted manipulation of the microfolds. Make it think it's winning, then hit where it's weakest." Lena's eyes narrowed. "We can use energy pulses to induce a partial collapse in the anomaly, force it to self-correct, but it will require precise timing and coordination. One misalignment, and we risk creating a new fold, maybe larger than the last." Thorne's jaw tightened. "We don't have a choice." The first operation began in the void beyond Helios. Drones launched in staggered arcs, their paths erratic, non-linear, designed to overload the anomaly's predictive capacity. The microreflections responded, folding around the drones in mirrored motion, but the chaos Thorne had hoped for began to take effect. One reflection loop destabilized, momentarily exposing a weak lattice node. Lena keyed in a surge pulse through the quantum array, and the fold collapsed inwards, forming a contained pocket of measurable stability. The exhilaration was brief. A violent hull quake reverberated through Helios, throwing crew against bulkheads and consoles. Maris shouted over the alarms. "Hull breaches, decks 7 and 9, reinforcement conduits compromised." Thorne reacted immediately, issuing commands for rapid lockdown and emergency force field deployment. Vents hissed, blast doors slammed, and the station's automated drone contingents were redirected to support human teams reinforcing stressed hull segments. The anomaly, sensing the disruption, pulsed again brighter, faster, more aggressive than before. Amid the chaos, Cale Riven spoke urgently. "We need to exploit the anomaly's response time. Every pulse, every reflection takes milliseconds to propagate. If we can predict the next fold's apex, we can preemptively disrupt it." Lena nodded. "I've calculated the probability sequences. If we cascade energy spikes in a counterphase pattern, timed precisely with the anomaly's fold response, we can create a temporary blind zone, maybe long enough to extract the remaining microreflection data." "Then we do it," Thorne said. "And we do it now." Helios became a synchronized chaos of kinetic and analytic precision. Drones darted unpredictably, shields pulsated in rapid, irregular intervals, and the reactor cores teetered on the edge of overload. Each crew member moved like a conductor in a symphony of survival, executing maneuvers honed under relentless pressure. The anomaly, for all its intelligence, began to display minor lag in response. A node blinked out of phase, a fleeting weakness, but a weakness nonetheless. The first wave of data was recovered. Lena's eyes flicked across the screens, absorbing the sequences, confirming the lattice patterns. We've mapped 62%, enough to predict short-term fold behavior. She exhaled, but there was no time for relief. Then came the betrayal. One of the tactical comm relays, used to synchronize drones, glitched intermittently, rerouting signals unpredictably. Merrick cursed under his breath. Someone's interfering with comms. It's deliberate. Thorne's eyes sharpened. Not external. Internal. Kale Riven's gaze darkened. I feared this possibility. There's a faction within command, political interests that want the anomaly studied, but not controlled. They may sabotage the operation to force Helios destruction, then claim the data posthumously. Thorne's fists clenched. Then we adapt again. Isolate the relay. Bypass it. Manual override. Merrick, Lena, we run everything offline if we have to. No interference will stop us. The next hours were a blur of precise chaos. Helios systems ran on the edge of overload, the crew improvising sequences manually, bypassing AI control to maintain unpredictability. The anomaly continued to adapt, but with increasingly violent distortions. One corridor bent sharply, trapping a repair team. Merrick and two others extricated them using magnetically stabilized tethers, pulling them against warped gravity vectors. By night cycle, or what passed for night in artificial orbit, partial victories emerged. Several folds have been forced into predictable microloops. Key energy nodes were identified, and the anomaly's lattice had been mapped sufficiently to predict its next movement with confidence. Casualties were heavy. 2 engineers sustained temporal disorientation, minor fractures and burns. Half the drone fleet was lost. The hull bore multiple scars, though the station remained intact. But it wasn't enough. A new fold appeared, larger, faster, more aggressive than any before. Sensors indicated it formed from residual energy left by the previous manipulations, feeding on the chaos of human improvisation. Lena's face paled as she observed the readings. We triggered it. Our last operation, its adaptation created this fold. And it's unstable, unpredictable, growing exponentially. Thorne's hand rested on the console. Then we prepare for offensive action. Not containment. Not observation. We hit the fold at its source. Kale's eyes widened. That will require entering the fold's event horizon. The space where time is bending against itself. If anyone goes in, there's no guarantee they return unaltered. Marek's jaw tightened. Someone has to. The station can't survive another wave like this. The team made a rapid calculation. Lena could stabilize micro-reflections to guide a limited incursion. Merrick could pilot the drone-laden craft manually. Thorne would oversee tactical coordination, and Kale would maintain probabilistic calculations to anticipate the fold's reaction. Preparation was brutal. Systems were stripped to bare essentials to divert every watt of power to the incursion. Hull shields reinforced, emergency life support backup prepared, drones reprogrammed for maximum maneuverability under time distortion. Each crew member faced their fears in silence, knowing any misstep could mean death, or worse. When the mission commenced, the fold enveloped the incursion team like a living organism. Time warped violently. Moments stretched and compressed unpredictably. Lena's pulse raced as she fed continuous corrections into the array, manually adjusting for micro-reflections while monitoring the team. Marek's hands flew over control interfaces, dodging impossible angles, threading drones through narrow temporal corridors. The anomaly reacted violently. Pulses of warped energy surged outward, threatening to collapse Helios' hull and destabilize the station entirely. Thorne coordinated emergency shield pulses, forcing stabilizers to maximum load. Kale muttered probability sequences, calculating every potential failure. They reached the heart of the fold. Lena guided drones to the lattice node, feeding bursts of energy in precise counterphase patterns. The fold pulsed, twisted, and collapsed inward, then blinked outward in a sudden reconfiguration. Sensors went dark for a heartbeat. Then telemetry returned. The node was contained, mapped, and collapsing. Victory was partial. The anomaly recoiled, but was not destroyed. One incursion drone failed to return. Merrick sustained temporal desynchronization, leaving him jittering slightly out of phase for the remainder of the operation. The station's hull had sustained severe stress. Secondary power systems overloaded, and repair teams were stretched thin. But the fold had been tamed, temporarily. Data was recovered, critical patterns documented, and for the first time, Helios had actionable insight into the anomaly's behavior. Thorne exhaled, exhaustion and relief colliding. "We've turned the game," he said quietly, voice carrying more resolve and hope. "Now we can start dictating terms." As they rested, systems humming with cautious stability, Lena studied the readings. The anomaly pulsed faintly outside the station, smaller, contained, but aware. She looked up at Thorne. "This is just the beginning. Next time, it will respond faster. Smarter. It's learning from us. And it's patient." Thorne's eyes, hard as tempered steel, met hers. "Then so are we. We adapt. We endure. And when the final strike comes, we hit harder than it can anticipate." A faint tremor ran through Helios as the anomaly pulsed once more, a warning, a challenge, a test. The crew had survived, but the ultimate reckoning was yet to come. The anomaly had grown sharper, more refined, a lattice of impossible folds that pressed against Helios like a living, intelligent cage. Thorne paced the operations deck, every step measured against the station's groaning hull. The partial victories of the last engagement had given them leverage, yes, but they were still playing defense against a force that existed beyond time as they knew it. Lena, Merrick, and Kale huddled around the tactical display, eyes bright with focus, exhaustion etched into every line of their faces. "We have one chance," Lena said, her voice steady but tense. "We need to exploit the environmental feedback within the fold itself. The micro-reflections have limits. They can be manipulated, yes, but only if we coordinate across multiple vectors simultaneously. Timing must be perfect." Marek's gaze was sharp. "That means going into the fold again. Manually. No autonomous drones. One miscalculation, and the spatial temporal distortion will tear us apart, or trap us inside. Permanently." Thorne met his eyes. "You know what's at stake. Everyone does. That's why we can't fail." Kale leaned over the display, tracking energy sequences in real time. "We have a narrow window. If we can force the lattice to overcorrect, the fold will create a temporary stable pocket. That's our entry point. But the anomaly will anticipate us. It always does. We'll need a diversion strong enough to make it miscalculate." The plan was audacious. Thorne would orchestrate a series of power surges across the station, creating unpredictable energy signatures that mimicked multiple false incursions. Merrick would pilot a team of drones directly into the fold, guided by Lena's quantum array. Kale would calculate probabilistic responses in real time, feeding them to Thorne and Lena to adjust strategy on the fly. The operation began. Helios shuddered as primary power diverted to shields and decoys, the station trembling under stress that approached structural limits. Drones launched in erratic arcs, deliberately contradicting every prior pattern the anomaly had seen. Lena keyed in the first pulse, stabilizing micro-reflections in critical nodes just long enough for Marek's manual control to take precedence. Time became fluid, folding in unexpected ways. Corridors bent outward. Observation decks shimmered with warped images of crew members moving moments before or after they actually did. Marek's drones darted through shifting reality, dodging pulses that bent space and warped light, guided only by Lena's real-time corrections. Every fraction of a second mattered. Then came the first major sacrifice. One of the primary incursion drones collided with a fold wall, a sudden collapse in space that trapped it mid-pulse. Marek's hands shook, pulling the craft back, but the drone was gone. The feed returned only a faint, distorted echo of its last transmission. Merrick swore under his breath. the weight of responsibility pressing down. "Keep moving," Thorn said, his voice cutting through calms. "Losses are expected. Survival is not optional." Lena's fingers flew over the array controls. "Another micro-reflection is destabilizing. If we don't correct, the fold will expand, tearing the station apart." Kale adjusted probability projections, voice tense. "We have one chance. If the anomaly adapts faster than we anticipate, this will become permanent. There's no going back once the lattice overcorrects." Merrick executed a precise maneuver, threading the drones through the fold's apex. Lena adjusted pulses to stabilize the reflection nodes, countering the anomaly's adaptive responses in real time. The anomaly thrashed, folding violently, but the coordinated effort began to work. The lattice warped inward, forming a temporary pocket of predictability, just long enough for sensors and drones to capture high-resolution data on its structure. But the anomaly was learning. As the team extracted the critical information, a violent surge erupted across the station. Hull panels bent and groaned, blast doors jammed. Automated defense systems triggered erroneously, nearly shredding a repair team in a corridor. Merrick shouted into comms, struggling to regain control of the drones as energy feedback threatened to destabilize them. Lena recalibrated the array mid-pulse, sweat streaming down her face, eyes wide with concentration. Kale's voice rang with urgency. "Fold is overcorrecting faster than projected. We have seconds before it collapses outward. If we don't stabilize now, we risk permanent spatial distortion." Thorn barked orders, directing shield pulses and energy diversions in precise sequence, coordinating every crew member like an orchestra. Merrick executed the final incursion maneuver, guiding drones into a precise feedback loop within the fold. Lena synchronized quantum array pulses with flawless timing, forcing the fold to compress into a stable, measurable node. There was a heartbeat of silence. Then the lattice snapped outward violently, sending a shock wave through the station. Alarms screamed, lights flickered, and the hull strained to its absolute limit. Merrick felt the craft shudder beneath him, nearly ripping free from his control. One drone disintegrated mid-pulse. Another vanished completely. And then, in that frozen instant, the anomaly collapsed inward on itself. The lattice compressed, stabilized, and the fold ceased its chaotic expansion. Telemetry confirmed the creation of a stable pocket, a controlled reflection node. The anomaly had been forced to submit, temporarily, to human manipulation. Thorn exhaled, leaning heavily against the console. "We've done it," he said, though the victory felt incomplete. The anomaly was contained, yes, but it had survived, adapted, and learned. Its intelligence, if one could call it that, was now aware of their tactics, their improvisations, and their willingness to sacrifice for survival. Lena slumped in her chair, exhausted, her hands trembling from hours of fine manipulation of the quantum array. It had worked, but at what cost? How long can we maintain this level of control? Merrick exhaled, still shaky from piloting through temporal distortions. "Not long," he muttered. "Every second we hold it here is another risk, another chance for someone, or something, to get hurt." Kale Riven spoke quietly, analyzing the data streaming in. "The fold is now partially understood. We can predict short-term behavior with high probability, but it's aware and it's patient. It will wait, adapt, and test us again. And when it does, the consequences will be severe." Thorn's gaze swept the observation deck, landing on the stabilized lattice visible through the viewport. It pulsed faintly, a living, intelligent rhythm. "Then we prepare," he said. "We don't get complacent. We don't assume victory. We anticipate, adapt, and endure. And we make sure that when the anomaly strikes again, we're ready to finish this." As Helios crew began repairs, shoring up hull integrity and recalibrating systems after the brutal incursion, the faint hum of the anomaly reminded them of the battle yet to come. It had been tamed, yes, but not defeated. The final reckoning, the end game, was approaching, and every life, every choice, every pulse of energy mattered. And somewhere in the folds of time, the anomaly waited, patient and calculating, knowing that human ingenuity could only stretch so far before the next test. The stable reflection node hummed faintly against the backdrop of Helios orbit, a fragile triumph in a war that had tested every nerve, every skill, and every ounce of ingenuity the crew possessed. Thorn moved through the operations deck, noting every scar on consoles, every worn edge of panels warped by temporal feedback. The anomaly pulsed faintly, aware, patient, and calculating. Helios had survived, but only barely. Every second counted now. They had to finish this. "We have the fold contained," Lena said, eyes scanning the quantum array. "But containment is temporary. If we do nothing, the anomaly will adapt and break free. We have one window, a final assault." Thor nodded, jaw set. "Then we take it. Full coordination, zero improvisation. Every system, every drone, every pulse timed perfectly." Merrick prepped the incursion craft. "Kale, your probability sequences need to anticipate every reaction. If we fail," he didn't finish. The threat hung in the air. Marik's hands flew over the controls, double and triple checking every trajectory, every contingency. About the fold entry vectors optimized. Manual control will be critical inside the lattice. One misstep, and we're dead. "Yes," Thorn interrupted. "We know that. We also know what's at stake. Now to your job." Kale adjusted his probability arrays, feeding Thorn real-time projections. Every pulse, every counterphase adjustment, every reflection node, we coordinated across 4 vectors simultaneously. The anomaly cannot adapt fast enough to counter it, provided timing is perfect. But there's a catch. Once we enter, we risk permanent temporal desynchronization. The crew moved with machine-like precision. Shields were pulsed in staggered sequences, reactor cores throttled and diverted for maximum output, and drones launched across synchronized vectors. Lena adjusted the quantum array to stabilize micro-reflections along the entry point. Every heartbeat was calculated, every movement anticipated. When the incursion team entered the fold, time itself seemed to stretch and compress. Corridors elongated, twisted, and looped upon themselves. Merrick piloted with a steady hand, threading drones through impossible spaces, while Lena fed constant adjustments to maintain the integrity of the entry nodes. Kale's voice guided them, calm but tense, anticipating every fold ripple. The anomaly reacted violently. Pulses surged unpredictably, bending space, stretching reality. Drones flickered in and out of existence, some vanishing entirely, leaving faint telemetry echoes. The station's hull shuddered as feedback loops raced through the reactor conduits. Thorn barked orders, adjusting energy flows to absorb the shock. Focus, timing, precision. At the fold's core, the anomaly's lattice twisted into a dense, pulsating knot. Lena keyed the quantum array to inject a synchronized counterphase pulse into multiple micro-reflection nodes simultaneously. The lattice trembled, warped, and then began to compress. Merrick guided the drones into the collapsing nodes, stabilizing them from within. But victory demanded sacrifice. One drone, carrying the primary energy relay, became trapped mid-fold. Merrick diverted manually, stabilizing the lattice just enough to complete the mapping, but the drone disintegrated under the stress. Marek's hands shook, the weight of loss pressing on him. Yet he remained focused, aware that hesitation could destroy the station. Lena synchronized the final pulse. Energy surged, the lattice compressed inward, then outward, forming a stable pocket. The anomaly's movement slowed, folding in on itself, constrained by human ingenuity. Kale adjusted probability arrays in real time, ensuring that the final collapse didn't trigger unpredictable expansions elsewhere. The anomaly thrashed in its final moments, a living lattice of energy and folded time, resisting, testing, and calculating. But the human network, discipline, coordination, and sacrifice proved superior. The fold stabilized completely, creating a permanent node of control. Telemetry confirmed containment. The anomaly was subdued, trapped within its own reflections. Helios crew exhaled, but there was no celebration. Hull panels bore deep scars, reactors hummed at maximum strain, and several crew members were temporarily desynchronized, their movements slightly out of sync with reality. One engineer had sustained minor fractures from a hull quake. Merrick showed faint jittering in his reflexes from temporal exposure. Yet they were alive, and the anomaly was controlled. Thorne surveyed the viewport. The lattice of the anomaly pulsed faintly, a subdued rhythm in contrast to its former chaos. Lena adjusted the array to maintain stabilization, noting every fluctuation. "It's contained," she said, voice firm but weary. "But it's aware. It will test us again if given the chance." Kale nodded. "We've learned enough to anticipate its moves. If it ever escapes, we'll have the sequences ready. But Helios must remain vigilant. This isn't over. This is survival codified." Merrick exhaled, letting his hands rest. "We made it through." Somehow, Thorne turned, face lined with exhaustion and determination. "We made it because we were disciplined, because we coordinated, and because we were willing to pay the price." The anomaly tested every limit, physical, mental, moral, and we endured. That's the doctrine we carry forward. Repair teams began restoring hull integrity, recalibrating systems, and reintegrating desynchronized crew. The station, battered but alive, hummed with cautious optimism. The permanent reflection node remained stable, a triumph of human ingenuity against an impossible force. Outside, the anomaly pulsed faintly, contained but aware. It had been subdued, but not destroyed. Thorne watched, understanding that vigilance was eternal. Yet for the first time, they had leverage, knowledge, and a doctrine born of relentless determination, tactical ingenuity, and the hard-won experience of surviving a force that folded time in on itself. As Helios drifted through orbit, lights flickering softly in the aftermath, Thorne allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. "We've survived," he said quietly, almost to himself. "We've learned, and we'll endure whatever comes next." The station's crew moved among the decks, repairing, recalibrating, and remembering. They had faced the impossible, paid the cost, and emerged victorious. Not through luck, not through convenience, but through skill, coordination, and sacrifice. And somewhere in the folds of controlled time, the anomaly pulsed, constrained, but aware, a reminder of the limits they had pushed and the vigilance the future demanded. Helios had won the battle. The war, however, was eternal.